Welcome to Hope on Fire, relevant talk radio for young adults. Whether you're 25 or 45, there's bound to be a discussion that you care about. Our mission is to share practical ways to find God in your everyday life. And now let's join today's host, Rick Mann.
Spending time with God every day. Now, we all know we should do it, but for many Christian young adults, devotional time is one of the first things that suffers with a busy schedule. Why is that? Well, maybe we just don't see the need. Or maybe devotional time doesn't really do much for you. Or perhaps no one has ever told you how to do it in the first place. You know, we have plenty of preconceived ideas of what devotion should be, but when it comes to a personal relationship with God, one size doesn't fit all. So on this week's Hope on Fire, we're going to take a few minutes to re-examine the basics of a dynamic devotional life and get us back on track to a more engaging personal relationship with God. And joining us to help us along this week are Dany Hernandez. You are the collegiate young adult, the collegiate and young adult?
Yes.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
Young adult.
young adult pastor.
Get it right.
Yeah, thanks. Right at Forest Lake Church here in Orlando, Florida. And we're glad you're here, Dany.
Well, good to be here.
Yeah, and Julie Clarke. She's our contributing editor this week for Hope on Fire. Julie, welcome back.
Thank you.
I should say welcome back because you were with Hope on Fire a very long time ago, but I guess
We're
3
not
years
that
ago.
old,
Well,
but-
yeah, it's been 3 years. Yeah, this will be
Yeah.
So anyway,
She wasn't any good, and they just cut her out. Or
yeah,
what?
well, she moved away, and she was
Okay.
our West Coast correspondent. But now you're back, so
good to
we're
be
glad.
back.
Yeah. And Delwin Finch, you are the web church pastor here at Forest Lake Seventh-day Adventist Church as well. And Delwin, you're also one of our staffers who you're normally behind the camera, but now you're in front. So
Let me switch around.
yeah, very good. Yeah, well, we're glad you're here, Delwin. Let me go ahead and just throw out this question. We'll start with Dany. How do we define devotional life? What does that mean?
I think that at the simplest form, you can just say that time spent with God. You don't need to be more complicated than that.
Okay.
That can look a lot of different ways for a lot of different people.
Right.
So, but to me, basically, is spending time with God.
What about you guys? Is that any different or about the same answer? Or?
Yeah, no, that's what I would say. Yeah, sure.
It varies in form, but it's definitely simplistic. Spending time with God.
Spending
yeah.
time with God. Well, let me throw out this other question. Why is having an active devotional life so important? I mean, why is that something we really should put as a priority in our life?
Well, you look at devotion. What does a devotion mean? Well, when you're devoted to something, if you're devoted to football, you're devoted to school. It means that you're going to follow it. You're going to be involved. You're going to be trying to live your life around whatever your devotion is. And if we truly say that we're Christians, followers of Christ, then our devotion needs to be towards God, and therefore we naturally spend time with Him.
Right.
Right.
Well, one of the things one of the reasons why I'm doing this show, I guess, is because I'm probably wanting to have the show actually help me in my devotional life. One of the things that I've noticed is that when I was in high school and especially college, I had a lot of stress in my life. I had, class, I had relationships, and I was a lot easier to find time to spend time with God, and there was a real connectedness I had. But as I've graduated, as I've gotten a career, gotten married, have kids, one of the things that I've noticed is I've just gradually have lost that connection. And so I've fallen back to, I pray before my meals. I'm going to church on the weekends, 3 out of 4 times a month. And that's not enough, is it?
No. You need to find time somehow to spend time with God, and it's hard in our everyday lives, especially because we're told to go, go, go. And how do you take that time from, you have your to-do list.
Right.
What are you going to do for the day? Well, where's God in that priority list? You
Right.
know, we got to find time.
Well, I guess one of the things that I've always kind of, felt guilty about is, if I'm a Christian, I should have a certain kind of lifestyle. And I guess what I mean by that is I should have a certain, routine in my life. And if that routine doesn't include God to a large extent, then can I really legitimately call myself a Christian? Is that something, should people feel guilty about not having, a strong devotional life?
I think that a lot of people do devotions because they feel guilty.
Oh, yeah, okay.
That's a good
In
point.
that you've heard it all the time. You got to have a devotional life. You got to have a devotional life, and it's just an excuse. You talked about the fact that when you were in college, it seemed like it was easier for you. But you talk to some of those people, and they're like, "Oh man, I got school, I got this, I got that. I don't have time, for a devotional life. When I finish and graduate and get a real job, I'll have more time."
Right.
But then they find themselves in that place with they get married, kids, and no, you make time for whatever's important for you. And like Julie said about having to-do lists, you know, I was sharing with her the other day that a lot of people have devotional life as one of the items in to-do list, as if we can put God in a list of things we need to do.
Check them off.
Sometime around 2 o'clock, I think I'm going to do God, you know, just because, it seems like a good time. You know, I'll be done with lunch and I'll be really sleepy, and then maybe I'll have some time for some prayer.
Right.
Where I've used I've used the example of a wheel in a bicycle where each spoke is something that we have to do in life. Like, you know, I got to go to school. I got to study for this test. You know, I got to go, you know, buy some bread so I can make my peanut butter and jelly, whatever it is. And right next to that, I got to have devotions, where it's just a spoke on the wheel. When in reality, as a Christian, God should be the hub where everything stems from. So you look at a devotional life. Is a devotional life something that you do, or is a devotional life something that you live?
Yeah, more what you are as opposed to what you do. Right.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I guess how I compare and contrast where I'm at now, and I've had, you know, kind of peaks and valleys where I've done a lot better and I've kind of, you know, slacked off, is that if God is really the true center of your life, you really have to spend time with Him. It's like if I'm going to have a deep and meaningful relationship with my spouse, I just can't do it by, you know, showing up one day a week, right?
Half-heartedly, can't do it.
You're right.
It just doesn't work that way, especially in a
Some
marriage.
of us would like to do that.
Yeah. Hopefully, my wife and our wives aren't watching right now. So.
She doesn't even know I'm here.
Yeah.
Oh boy.
Well, let's go ahead and start talking about where do we get started to have more of a dynamic and, you know, vibrant devotional life. Where do we start? How do we prep for devotional time with God? What are some of the requirements that we need to kind of maybe get out of the way?
I think the easiest place where anybody can actually start, because it doesn't take a whole lot, is prayer. You don't have to have a book. You don't have to have a Bible. You don't have to have anything special. You can just have prayer. And I think for a lot of people, that actually should be the beginning of their journey into a devotional life, because it is your communication means with God.
Right.
So prayer would be, I would say, you know, the first place to start.
Yeah.
Well, let me throw this out to you, Julie. I mean, have you ever felt like maybe not having devotions? Have you ever gotten, it's like, and that prayer, I guess, for me has been, well, that's a place to start, but the prayer is more like, hey, God, you know, give me the desire to want to spend time with you. Have you ever had that prayer?
Oh, yeah. Many times.
Yeah.
Because like you, it seems like, you know, you've got your ups and your downs, your roller coaster of devotional life, you know, with God. And how do you keep it? I've found that every day. How do you keep it your top priority? How do you just do it all the time? And I do think that it starts with prayer, because if you don't have that prayer and asking God, how do you have that desire in your heart?
Right.
And I think your heart is a big part of it. You know, after praying, you have to have a pure heart wanting to do it, having that desire.
Right. Yeah, I mean, when you talk about a pure heart, you're talking about basically pushing out everything else. I mean, one of the things that what we talked about earlier was if it's just an item on your checklist, what you're really going to be concentrating on probably is what you just finished. Now I'm in devotions, and you know, this is just something I need to get through before the next item on my list. I mean, Delwin, let me ask you this. I mean, is devotion something that you have to make room for in your life?
Well, I think, at least for me personally, I have to. Just because if I don't, I'll find plenty of other things to do. I mean, it's not like I lack for something to do, even if it's nothing more than getting up and going to work instead of stopping before I go to work.
Right.
Yeah, you have to make time. But I think, like Dany said, if it becomes something that, okay, I have to do this, and it's a guilt motivation, the time isn't always going to be the best, you know, well spent.
Right.
And there's so many different things to take in consideration when you're doing this, because I'm going to ask you guys a question, you know. Oh, yeah, sorry. I'm going to ask you a question, because I think we all have to ask ourselves this. Do you have to put your wife, the person that you love, on a list to remind yourself to talk to them and spend time with them?
Right.
Or is that something that just naturally happens because you love them?
Right.
Right.
You know, and I think that when we talk about, it's great that we can ask God, give me the desire to spend time with you. If you asked your wife, you know, honey, I've been praying to God that He gives me the desire to spend time with you.
Right.
Yeah, what would that sound like? So I think that the lowest denominator here is the fact that if we love God, if we desire to honestly have a relationship with Him, then the devotional life will become just that, a life of devotion, 24/7.
And that's the motivation we're talking about.
Right.
But it's also the perseverance aspect. Is that even if you don't feel like doing it, like if you get up at 5, well, there's no way I could get up at 5 o'clock in the morning to go work out.
Amen.
Yeah, but you can tell that I've got a great workout.
Oh, yeah.
ethic.
It's working good.
You are strong.
Yeah. It's perseverance, though. It's like it's getting up, actually doing it, making that prayer that says, "God, enter into me, help me want to do this," and even if you don't, you keep doing it anyway.
Right. And I think that's an important point because you don't always feel like it. In fact, many times when I don't feel like it is probably when I need to be doing it the most. It's not something I feel like. And if I focus just on how I feel, I probably feel like going back to bed. Or I probably feel like, I need to worry about my bills or whatever it is instead of spending time with God.
Right.
And so I can't always rely on my feelings because they're not always a good barometer. In fact, they're often the opposite of what it should be.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, the break's coming up here in a couple minutes, but let's go ahead and get started with the idea of where do we start? I mean, if we're talking about devotions, we're talking about, trying to re-energize, getting back to the basics, I guess. I mean, what's one of the fundamental things? We talked about prayer, which we'll talk about more a little bit later, but, where do we start? What should be the foundation for our devotions?
Well, obviously, the Bible. I would start at the Bible because that is God's word for us, and it reveals His character in our feeble human attempt to try to connect with God and try to understand what He's like. Then obviously the place to start will be the Bible because it is God's revelation to us.
Right. Well, what are the pitfalls, Delwin? I'll throw this out to you. What are the pitfalls of just, sitting down and opening the Bible and finding something to read?
Well, if you do that, I mean, first of all, you're probably going to end up in the Old Testament. If you just open the Bible and right in the middle of the Old Testament, which is, I love the Old Testament, but if you have a bit of a plan or a bit of an approach, I mean, if you start, for example, to me, it seems like a great place to start would be with the Gospels. To start with, say, the book of Mark. It's a short, everything that happens in there is a gospel of action. It's a place to start. You probably know the stories already. So, if you grew up in a church or anything, you probably already know it. But start with a gospel, for example, and then read it through. And you don't always have to read it through for, deep insight. Sometimes it's just good to get caught up in the story. But start there.
What about having a plan, Julie? I mean, is that something, like, I'm sure you've probably been out on a date before where the guy says, "So what do you want to do tonight?" And you're like, well, whatever you want to do. Right, yeah.
And then you do nothing.
Right.
It's time to go home.
Well, see you later. Yeah.
That worked out
That
well.
was fun.
Yeah.
Cheap date. Same thing with the Bible. If you don't have a plan, how are you going to stick to it?
Right.
Right.
Yeah. So, well, that's interesting. Well, when we come back from the break, we're going to be talking more about how to maybe re-energize the Bible being a foundational part of our devotions. And then we'll move into talking about some Christian meditation, which might freak some people out, but we'll try to help them feel a little better about that and then get on to some more of the things. This is Hope on Fire. Welcome back to Hope on Fire. This week we are talking about a more dynamic devotional life. So I know if you're like me, there's a lot of young adults out there who maybe are just suffering from a lack of devotional life. And so hopefully this show this week is helping you get back to the basics of what it means to have a more dynamic devotional life. Right before the break, we were talking about one of the fundamental basics of any devotional life is essentially just reading the Bible. And we talked about having a plan, Julie, right? That just like a guy wouldn't ask a girl out on a date and not have any idea what they were going to do, is the same thing with the Bible. You just can't just open it up and plop down and start reading, because then well, who knows where you're going to go. And that might work once or twice, and you can say, well, the Holy Spirit led me to this chapter.
You just open the middle.
Yeah. And there's an angelic light glowing on you, and, this Alleluia chorus behind you. That's only going to happen, that's not going to, you can't
It
be
won't
consistent.
happen again?
Well, hopefully, yeah.
It's your turn around.
Yeah, okay, I'll try it next time.
What are some other things that we should keep in mind when we're using the Bible as a fundamental part of our devotional life? Is there anything else that we should keep in mind?
Well, I think we should. It helps a lot to use different translations, to look at it differently. Sometimes you can use a paraphrase that's not just a literal translation, because the language is more dynamic.
Right.
That helps a lot. Also, taking a break from it sometimes. I find, for myself at least, I've been spending maybe the last however many weeks or whatever reading a particular book, and then of the Bible, and then I take a break and I say, you know what? Now I'm going to read this devotional book. instead, and it gives me some variety.
So, I mean, really kind of gets down to, listen, the Bible is a fundamental part of a devotional life, but on the other hand, we shouldn't necessarily feel completely locked into reading the Bible every day in our devotional lives, right?
Right, I agree.
No, there's just a lot of different things that, and Julie, you were going to say something.
No, go ahead.
There's a lot of different things that you can do, from reading some other devotional book like a Max Lucado or, just tons of different things, to spending some time listening to some music, or listening to a sermon or a message, on your iPod or whatever the case might be.
Right.
But varying it so that you don't get burned out on the same thing.
Right.
It's like the exercise thing. If you're going to exercise and just work out your biceps, before you're walking around with one big arm, and that's it.
Yeah.
Right.
So just varying it not only is going to help you remain at least keep some sort of interest in what you're doing, but also balanced in your devotional life.
Right. Yeah, when we're talking about study as a part of our devotional life, it could be the Bible, it could be an outside book. But I think, and let me just throw this out to you, tell me what you think. Is it something that we should be just reading and not really taking it to heart, or should we kind of be trying to practically apply what we read to our life? I mean, how do you take something that, that was written thousands of years ago and kind of make it dynamic or make it applicable?
Understand, first of all, that it's God's word.
Right.
Okay, and God doesn't change. So whatever, happened back whenever it was, it still applies to me today.
Right.
The language might be different. The surroundings might be different. But ultimately, the principle behind what you're reading remains the same.
Right.
I might not be sitting in a hillside looking for a little boy with fishes and bread, but it still applies that God is asking people to give what they have.
Right.
And maybe God is asking me to give whatever I have,
and then
whatever,
he can do something
and
with
then
it.
he can do something with it.
Right.
So it's not necessarily. There's two types of studies. You can study theologically, and I guess when you talked about different versions, that helps you. Sometimes the clear word.
Clear word is great.
And it makes it simple for you, where you just read it for what it says.
Right.
Just out of pure simple
just get
fact
caught up
of,
in the story.
What does it say? It says, is anyone sick? Yeah, that's what it's. I'm not going to try to figure out what does anyone mean. What does sick mean?
Right.
Can I say something? Are you done?
No.
Oh, okay.
I should have a little red light. This is 30 seconds for Dany.
Danny's done. No, before you can take it to applying it to yourself, I think you actually need to understand it. Understand what the Bible is trying to say. And then you can maybe try and apply it to yourself. But just actually understand reading what God's words are, and then you can go and apply it to yourself.
Right. Well, let's move into another aspect, and I think it's really kind of funny because I never even thought about this when I say this. I'm talking about meditation, Christian meditation as a part of my devotional life. I had never even heard of this until I took a class in college on it was a spiritual formations class, and when I read the chapter out of the book talking about Christian meditation, it just really kind of floored me because I'm like, what is that? let me throw that out. What is Christian meditation, and is it something that we can apply in our devotional life, Dany?
Oh. The first time I did it, I fell asleep.
It was very meditative.
Well, it
was so relaxing.
It was right after lunch, and the teachers was like, kick your heads back and close your eyes.
We're doing that.
Imagine with me. No, we were. But, the couch was so comfortable.
Right.
And, before I knew it, he was done. And I had a good nap.
Oh, dear.
But no, I think that a lot of people have the idea immediately. They go to, yoga, Far East, all this stuff. We shouldn't meditate. Well, why not? The Bible over and over, tells us to meditate
on the Word. Right.
Day and night. All the time. And so I think that as we do that, we basically try to put ourselves in the situation and hopefully understand better what was going on, and by doing that, get something out of it.
Well,
how profound is that?
Yeah, let's actually make a little bit more practical about how to do it. I mean, this isn't a thing where we're trying to empty ourselves and become nothing and center down to nothingness. What we're really talking about is kind of opening ourselves up for God to talk to us, and like I said, it's kind of weird until you've actually done it before, but a very basic form of meditation, it's actually worked for me, is like a sanctified imagination, which is just a really cool way of just saying what you were saying is, I can read a passage in the Bible, say in the New Testament, the Last Supper, for instance, and very easy and very cool form of Christian meditation is putting yourself into that story, right? And it can be relaxing, but if you're engaging your mind and saying, okay, well, I wonder what Jesus looked like. I wonder, what did the candles and the food and the table look like? And imagine the words being said and put yourself physically into that story. It really comes alive for you.
Think of the sounds that you would hear, the smells, and try to incorporate all your senses. What did it feel like? What does the table feel like?
Right. I think it completely opens up the idea of making it personal, and maybe gives you insights that you have never had into that verse before, because it essentially personalizes it for you because you were there. But again, I don't want to freak anybody out that's out there listening. It's like, this isn't, some kind of weird new age thing. It really is a very sanctified, very centering, but very, engaging type thing.
So if you were to define meditation, what,
I'll let Julie say that because she's just chomping at the bit to say something.
I've been trying to again.
So, Julie, if you could define meditation.
Well, meditation. I was just going to say, though, just like a good book you pick up and read, like a book you want to read, you let your imagination work.
Right.
Yeah. So you go to the Bible, you read it, and you either fall asleep or you can let your imagination work. I think it's the same way.
Now, people might wig out when you're talking about your imagination running wild. However, one of the books
that's another show.
Yeah, one of the
that's another topic.
Yeah, one of the books that I read to prep for this was Celebration of Discipline. We've used it before for several of my shows by Richard Foster. He talks about God gave us an imagination, and just like anything that God has given us, we can misuse. Same thing with imagination. But in this case, if we're using it to imagine, something biblical and putting ourselves into it, he says, that's obviously not. It's not something we need to be too concerned about.
Right.
Okay, so we've talked about Bible study. We've talked about study in general, meaning, okay, well, if the Bible, don't necessarily get burned out on that. You can bring in some other resources. We've talked about Christian meditation. There's really a third pillar now of devotional life, and that's prayer. Right? What is prayer, Dany? I mean, if you had to define prayer, what would it be?
Talking to God.
Okay.
God talking to you.
Well, that's the other aspect, and that's maybe what we should delve into in the last couple of minutes.
Listening to God.
Yeah.
Listening.
Prayer is a two-way communication, right?
Right.
Now, this is the thing that's always wigged out, and this is what I need some guidance from you guys. It kind of wigged me out is that, from the meditation standpoint now into prayer has always been one way for me. It's one of those things where I pray for what I want, and then I say amen, and then I get up. But what about that second aspect of that, waiting for God to talk to you? Is that something that's difficult for young people, Dany, that you found in your experience?
Yeah, I think they just, until you get used to it, it just feels weird.
Right.
And that I tell a lot of people, when you pray, what would it be like? Again, using the wife example. If you got home and say, hey, honey, my work today, good night.
Long day.
Go to sleep. And she's like, I didn't get a chance to say anything. Yeah, kind of like I exactly. You know what I'm talking about, right?
Can't get a word in edgewise.
Yeah.
Show's over.
Sorry.
Anyways,
Okay.
So yeah, at times we don't give God a chance to actually speak to us because we're too busy talking.
Right.
And I tell a lot of people, when you pray, say what you got to say, and then be quiet.
That's hard.
And not fall asleep.
It is hard.
Right.
Be quiet, be still,
And
listen. Listen for what? Listen. For what? Just listen. And it's going to be weird at first, but after a while, you get used to it. And I know that personally, when I stop and listen, by the time I'm done, I'm scared of the things I heard. It's just my imagination. Am I making it up? Was God really talking to me? Was that the devil talking to me?
Right.
What's going on here? But you get used to it, and it becomes a time where I feel refreshed because I feel that, I gave God a chance.
Right. Well, go ahead, Julie.
Well, and when you start to listen, you think that, you're getting these thoughts. Is that God? Or is that just your imagination? Is it you're having these thoughts? And is it just listening, and that could be God giving you those thoughts?
Right. Because it's not this booming voice that just comes down and says, I understand, Rick. This is what we're going to do.
Text message.
Right. Well, I just want to thank you guys very much. We've had a great show, and hopefully our audience has enjoyed this and brought them a little closer to more of a dynamic devotional life. We've covered a lot of material today, but let's try to recap a few of the basics. First, begin by praying for an open and willing heart. God knows that sometimes we just don't feel like spending time with Him, and He can remind you why you were there in the first place. Second, have a plan. Devotionals can be dynamic and engaging, but we have to have a framework to guide us in the right direction. Third, the Bible. It's a foundational part of our devotions, but don't be afraid to find other engaging material to integrate into your time with God. Fourth, you got to make time. If we don't make devotional time a priority, it will be one of the first things that we cut from our busy schedules. And finally, make it your own. Devotionals are personal time with God. Find out what works for you and make it your own. If you have an idea to share about how to make devotions more dynamic, we would love to know about it. Find us on the web at www.hopeonfire.org. For all of us here at Hope on Fire, I'm Rick Mann. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you again next week.
Hope on Fire is produced by Livestreams Media, a listener-supported ministry. To download a free copy of today's program or be a part of our social network, please visit our website at hopeonfire.org. You may also contact us by writing to Livestreams Media, P.O. Box 608513, Orlando, Florida 32860. Once again, that's Livestreams Media, P.O. Box 608513, Orlando, Florida 32860. Or online at hopeonfire.org. Thank you so much for your letters and continued support. Until next time, may God set your hope on fire.